All right. I think we got it that time. It was kind of weird. Not really sure what's going on there. Hopefully, I am on, and hopefully, we're gonna actually do this morning. PT on Ice, Monday morning with Pop. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully, some people are able to log on and join. This is like third time is a charm kind of a thing, so I'm not really sure what happened there. So anybody who tried to get on the first two times, my Facebook Live just kind of froze. It was the first time it's ever happened for me. So we'll give people a minute here and log on. Hey, Mark, looks like Mark's on this morning, and get right into it. So this morning, what I'm going to do, let me start the clock as always. What I wanted to do this morning was talk a little bit about, sort of the final findings of the summer of Move. Yes, the oxen are in the stable, Mark. That is, they're back in and quietly resting, thankfully. So just to kind of put some final touches on the summer of Move. So if you've been following along a little bit in this this conversation these last few weeks, I've been sort of dropping some nuggets in about some of the design elements that we did and that we set out to do with the Summer of Move. And really the fact of the matter is that not everybody appreciates all of the design elements, but that they are built to drive specific actions, reactions, and kind of cross-pollination amongst groups. And that there is a method to the madness, and that although we could never do it in 15 minutes, and honestly we could never do it in an hour. I mean, this is this is stuff that people are doing every day, and network scientists are spending their entire lifetime doing this. It is stuff that we can use, and it's stuff that can be applied and practical, and that we can get what we really desire. So what it comes down to ultimately, and I don't want to waste a bunch of time on this because I think everybody kind of gets it, is that at some level, when we're talking about moving populations, when we're talking about moving groups, at some level it comes down to the idea of we need certain behaviors to happen, and we need those behaviors to become norms, and when they become norms, we're much more likely to get the outcome we want, right? So we know without beyond the shadow of a doubt that people who move quite a bit can prevent and reverse a lot of different diseases if they're doing it at the right intensities and the right dosages and consistently enough. We know that people who eat, diets very high in fiber and diets that have, support for a low inflammatory gut microbiome, for example, which ultimately means a lot of plants, those people are going to thrive. They're going to have reductions in risk and so on and so forth. We know that people who sleep well get the same effect. We know that people who have stress management skills and resilience have the same effect. And we know that people who have tight social networks, especially supportive social networks, have that same effect. So those are all things, and those are, of course, those five elements. And, no matter where I go or whatever I talk about, it's going to come down to one of those five things, because in our experience so far, we haven't really found anything that doesn't include. But the real trick and the real game of this whole thing and the real, effort, so to speak, is to figure out how to make it propagate. It's hard personally, on your own. It's hard to do this stuff. It's hard to kind of keep a healthy set of behaviors. It's even harder to influence others, and that can be hard even in small units, family units, for example. Not everybody wants to do this stuff. And then, of course, it gets exponentially harder the more people that you involve, because now all of a sudden you've got all these confounding variables and all these complexities. And so there is really, really a lot that kind of connects to that. And if you really want the outcome, which is what most people in the applied prevention health promotion space will ultimately be hired to do, right? So the people who are getting into this space in their practice, the people who want to practice this way, at the end of the day, and certainly the CERT graduates know this, we talk about this right from day one in the course, at the end of the day, you're being hired to solve a problem. Hey, I have this problem. You, with your expertise and experience, are going to come in and help me solve this problem, hopefully in a unique way. Well, we certainly know that getting people moving is a major problem, right? And so I've hit on that in the last several weeks, and I don't have to sort of beat that dead horse. Everybody gets it. The United States and the world is not moving nearly enough. And we have to find ways to help people to move more, and quite honestly, to move more vigorously in many cases. So movement on one hand is good, and certainly we'll take it. This year we put the category in there, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which essentially means moving but not at the level of exercise. So just kind of your daily stuff. And that we know does have an impact. I mean, there's been some research at a Mayo Clinic years ago. This was kind of where the treadmill desk came about. People who walk even at 1 mile an hour can have a nice change over time if they spend enough consistency and enough time doing it. So we know that that exists, but we ultimately also know that fitness has basically three bands, let's call them. I think that's easy for people to understand. That's certainly how I explain it to my clientele. You've got kind of like your low and slow band. That's that NEAT. That's that ability to just kind of keep on keeping on. And we know the energy systems that do that. You've got kind of like your moderate band, which most athletes would call functional threshold training. Stuff where it's like you can remain aerobic, but you're pushing up near your limits, and there's benefits of that. And then of course you've got that anaerobic band, which is your power and high intensity work and all that other stuff. And to thrive, we really need all three, and there's benefits of training all three. And we know that most people get kind of stuck, even the ones who are movers get stuck in kind of one of the three. So that was a secondary problem this year, right? We walked in the door saying, listen, we know in general people don't move enough, and so we're going to probably have a representative population, even though we may be recruiting people who are highly movers anyway by comparison. We also know that that's variable. You're going to have some people who are really high and some people aren't. Second thing that we know is that most people are not getting the right amount of each of those bands, and we could certainly stratify that even deeper, but let's just keep it at low, medium, high intensity. And so that's something we have to do. The third problem that we know that people aren't getting nearly enough variability in their movement. People tend to kind of get into a routine. If I'm a runner, I'm a runner. If I'm a cyclist, I'm a cyclist. I'm a CrossFitter, I do CrossFit type stuff. And of course, we know even within the CrossFit world, where variability is a critical thing, people tend to gravitate towards certain areas where they feel good. Okay, fine. So we know that that's another confounding variable, and we have to find ways to help people explore that, the exploration of movement itself. And so the key thing is that all of those things are variables. Now, that's kind of like the behavioral side. Then you add in the social side, right? And we know that there are people who, are afraid. Like, let's be perfectly honest, are afraid to explore certain movements. Maybe they've had pain. Maybe they had a bad experience once. Maybe they just don't believe they can do it, or maybe they were, fed some bill of goods somewhere that certain movements are bad for them. Like, whatever, but they bring certain fears with them, for certain anxieties with them, and that's going to affect their behavior. It's going to make them either pro or con a certain activity. They're going to influence the group, influence dynamics, and so we have to consider that. Other things to consider. We have to consider that not everybody's agenda is the same. Some people show up to a group with a very specified agenda. They're not there to kind of jump all the way in. They're there to push some other agenda. Maybe they're there to sell something. Maybe they're there to meet other people. Maybe they're there to, find, someone like them. Like, we don't know what people are bringing, but everybody kind of has a different reason, reason for existing in a social group. And so, some people nicely call that, like, what's their why in the situation. Other people would say, look, they have an agenda, whether it's conscious or subconscious. So that's another variable that we have to consider. So with the Summer of Move design, we took all of those variables. There's many that we could kind of get on paper and say, yep, you got to think of that. Yep, we got to think of that. Yep, we got to think of that. And then we did our homework. And believe it or not, there is quite a bit of research out there on social dynamics and how to move groups and how to get people to change and how to get behaviors to propagate and how many people do you need and what do you need them to do and how often and how regularly and what's the design of the network and how should that network be literally built, like what's the shape of it to get the most and the fastest propagation. Now, of course, you have all of that combined with the fact that there's a boredom element, right? That people like novelty, they like something new, they like something different, and that most people don't have literally the mental focus to stick with something long enough to get the long-term result. If that wasn't the case, everybody would have enough money by the time they retire because it's so easy. We know it's a simple behavior. Put some money aside. Every professional who gets a paycheck would have plenty of money at the end. We also know that very, very few actually pull that off because of the day-to-day boredom that, well, I don't have to worry about it. That's somewhere out into the future, and all I can think about is my today, right? So we're terrible future planners in general. So we know that you've got a timeline. You've got 6 to 8 weeks in most people, and then from there you'll have some that you can dial in a little closer and a little closer. And maybe the most committed can do 6 months, and maybe the hyper committed, like the rare few, can get into an annualized training kind of a plan. So we've got to take that into consideration. So what does that boil down to? What that means, what that boils down to is that when we're thinking about solving a problem, in this case the physical activity problem, we've got 6 to 8 weeks to get a few people, a handful of people, so deeply committed to the idea, so rabidly connected with each other, so enthusiastic about moving, that it begins to propagate and reinforce itself, that it starts to drive those behaviors and make those the new norms. And then, of course, the idea is how long can that carry over? So in a sense, it's like, well, when you achieve one finish line, you're really at the next starting line. We will see, and I hope, and I'm not measuring this at all, but I hope that the people who got through all the way through yesterday, that this will carry over for a while. We are already seeing signs of that. People are already kind of expressing a little bit of that kind of like post-finish line remorse, like, oh, I'm gonna miss it. Like there's not as much going on. Like what will I do now? And that certainly happens, especially with endurance athletes and racers. They sign up for their next marathon, within 2 weeks of finishing their last one because they sort of miss it. So we'll see if that had that kind of lasting effect. And the truth of the matter is, it's like Half-Life. Chances are good that it won't have that lasting effect. We won't keep people dialed in. But the real question will be, did we create a good enough experience that will create a positive emotion that person wants to carry forward? And if it did, then we have the seeds of change. Now, a couple of things that we also need to just sort of understand and mention, and that people who are interested in this space need to kind of get their hands wrapped around, is that in many cases, and I certainly mentioned this in the course, and I know that people who have seen me speak, hear this quite a bit. In many cases, it does not take a majority to make this happen. And once again, the summer move, it clearly showed that it doesn't. It takes a very, very vocal, committed minority. And most research says it's somewhere in that 20% range. Some recent research in 2018 said that it's 25%. But the bottom line is that if you can get about a quarter of a population to really lock in, you can get them to spread a certain, minority feeling or minority opinion. Now, one of the most important opinions is that this stuff is worth it, okay? Is that it's worth the effort. Now, we did some things to grease the skids. We made it about charity. We tried to tap into some altruistic, some altruistic nature of people, and that kind of got the ball rolling. We did another little trick. We built teams, right? Because people tend to, do things for others once they kind of get committed to it. A third thing we did is we created private communication channels. The way a person communicates definitely has a role to play in kind of reinforcing their day-to-day, because it's what I see every day. And then third, we tried to make that walled off a little bit, tried to create a safe environment. So those are some little nuggets, some examples of how we went about crafting an environment that would reward this and that would help it to propagate faster. Now, I will tell you that it took about 3 to 4 weeks, I think, for things to kind of really settle in, right? In the first few weeks, we had quite a few people, which is the case in any scenario, who were not sure, hey, I'm not sure about this, and other people who were kind of like passively detracting, like, well, I don't know, maybe this isn't a good idea, sort of like, like against it, was, a little fearful to get all the way in for whatever reason, but not actively, I'm not going to block this, I'm not going to try to, tell people not to do it, but I'm not going to tell people to do it either. And then there was sort of like the active, blockers, like, you frustrated me, and now I'm going to find a way to sort of make people miserable. What's interesting about that is if you watch the social dynamics, you can quickly see those get engulfed. When you have committed people who are positive, doing something they know is good, doing something they know helps other people, and has sort of a beneficial effect, right? Like, yes, moving more helps me get healthier, but if you followed the Summer of Move conversation, that wasn't what was driving people. That was just kind of a nice secondary result. What was driving people is my team. I got to do it for my team. I got to wake up early and get out there and do burpees because my team's counting on me. B, competitive. Just in general, people tend to be competitive and want to win. Third, altruism. Certainly there's money on the line for charities. Not a ton of money. In fact, not very much at all in the grand scheme of things, but enough to make it worthwhile, enough to make it, something, and enough to make me feel good. And then fourth, the idea of adventure. The idea of this is something new and different, and it's not going to last forever, but it's something that I'm pushing myself into, and I'm exploring growth. At the end of the day, that's growth. It's just the fact that as humans, we desire it. We want to solve problems. We want to figure things out. Now, what are the end results? You're going to see it this week. We from the Free the Yoke account on Twitter, I would keep an eye on that. We're gonna push some of the social posts out there this week. They were awesome. They were awesome. You can see just people's sort of joy and excitement, that kind of came together. But one of the ones that you'll see, certainly Alan, who everybody knows on this channel, he did a really nice post and took some of the stats. And you will just see some mind-blowing numbers from a small group of people couple of hundred people, thousands and thousands of exercise, hundreds of thousands of pounds lifted, miles and miles run. I mean, like just really, really cool stuff. And when we look at the numbers, when we ultimately look at it, every single person who played, every single person on average would have doubled the physical activity guidelines in America. So to me, that's kind of proof in the pudding, right? So with my 33 seconds left, I'm just going to leave it with that concept. That at the end of the day, we know the dosage that we need. We know we need 150 minutes or 75 of vigorous. We know that people aren't getting enough. We know that like the science supports it and that we can, rail about it until we're blue in the face with the idea that, like it's good for us. We should do more of it. And we also know all of that still doesn't drive change in behavior. But when you put it into a novel scenario, when you design it to roll a certain way, when you connect other people, when you build social interactions, and when you give people a mission that they think they can accomplish and support them with the ability to communicate and figure it out as a group, well then you get some amazing things and some really, really impressive results, both from the health side, definitely from the behavioral level, but maybe most importantly, from the bonding of it. And so that's kind of the final takeaway, and I'll leave it there now that I'm a little over time here. I'll leave it there. I suspect that the people in these groups, if they can build some momentum around where they're at now, they will make some change in their communities. That part, I suspect, will happen. I think we're going to see that. And the main reason why is because they have now seen it. They've experienced it. It's applied. They understand they can do it. And they also understand that it can be filled with joy and fun, and that it really is an expression of who we are. That yes, movement can reverse and prevent disease. Sure, it can be medication if we want to make it. Or it can be about what makes us innately human. It can be about what drives us to do what we do on this planet. And that it's an expression of our life and our reality. And it can be a very, very healthy, positive way to sort of pass that expression on to the people around us. So hopefully if you've had some fun watching, or you've been paying attention, or you've been kind of watching from the sidelines, you got to see a really good show. I think for the people that were inside and kind of got to really experience this, I think this year was another step up. That's kind of the the impression I'm getting from most people, and I fully expect that depending on what the Oxen shake out with next year, it could be even bigger and better yet. Bottom line is that for those that are APHPT members, for those that are on virtual ice, we're going to continue to pick this apart, because these are the things that you need to understand if you really want to get your family, your community, your population, society to actually transform. These are the real things. These are the things that we really need to build. Yes, Mark, I see that goes back to transformative experience. It's exactly what it is, and there's no it's not a coincidence that I'm drinking out of my Starbucks mug today, because they're a group who's done that very, very well and have built of course, a major juggernaut in so doing. All right, I'm over time. I'll leave it there. Everybody, it's Monday. It's a gray Monday in New Jersey. Apparently the environment is sad because the summer move is over. The oxen are back in the stable. It is Monday. It's almost time to go back to work hard and heavy in the fall. Make it count.